So these early cities, what were they like? Well, they were small, they were compact, and they were obsessed with farming and food. And in fact, if you look at this one, the city of Ur, you can see in the middle, it's dominated by an enormous temple complex that was not only the city's spiritual centre, but it was also the city's chief food distribution centre, because this was where the harvest was organised, the grain was gathered in, it was stored in the temple, offered up to the gods who took what they liked, and then the rest of the grain was gradually redistributed to the people. So as I say, a central food distribution system that actually coupled a spiritual idea of what it was for the city to eat and bound it to the landscape. But of course, not all cities in the ancient world were small. Rome famously had 1 million or so citizens by the 1st century AD. So how on earth did a city this big feed itself before refrigerated trucks and so on? And the answer is what I call ancient food miles. Food miles aren't anything new. I know Tim Lang only coined the phrase a few years ago, but actually they've been around for a very long time. So if you look at Rome in the middle here, this is its rural hinterland. Basically, pretty much the whole of the known world, certainly all of the Mediterranean coastline, even Britannia, which was exporting oysters, fresh oysters to Rome at the height of the empire. And really, if you look at this map, it's extraordinary. You realise that there could only have been one Rome at that time, because it was literally waging war on Carthage and then later on Egypt in order to get its hands on their grain reserves. It was absolutely critical to the city's survival to keep those grain supplies coming. And so it had to dominate in order to eat. And if you like, I mean, you can see the expansion of the Roman Empire as some sort of enormous militarized shopping spree effect.
On the bridge, which I curate or am artistic director of, and it was a sort of extension of Feast, really. And it's a yearly project where we close Southwark Bridge and we bring people together to reclaim a big public space and to turn it into a banqueting space where people can come and sit down and share food, share conversation, learn how to do something. There's a whole load of practical workshops around it. And it is also a platform for ethical food producers who come and cook on the bridge and provide all the food for the feast.
But this is a model that we use. We do a lot of work with food chains and some of the big global companies, and trying to make sure that some of these critical issues stay on the agenda. It's not just, you know, the classic thing when you employ people, you assess them, and whether they can prioritise. It's one of the hardest things to do in life, is learning to prioritise. Everyone will know, we've all struggled with it. It's also one of the worst things to teach people to do, because what we do is we do that. And actually, when you talk to a lot of the food chain currently, it comes back to the first thing is say, well, we've got to produce affordable food. And it trumps everything else. You know, it's got to be cheap, it's got to be something that people can afford. But actually, they're right. It is absolutely right. We have to produce affordable food because we want to feed everybody, don't we? And in order for them to eat, they've got to be able to afford it. So I don't really have an issue with it. It's just I have an issue with it if it's left in isolation. We've got to produce affordable food with the available resources, and that means not destroying the planet while we're doing it. We didn't have to think like that before. All the models that have worked before, all the corrections we've made, all the problem solving have been soaked up by the fact that we had a planet that sort of thought, oh God, here they go again, and it had room to get. We don't have that slack in the system. We're farming every inch of it now, and we're losing topsoil. We're losing water reserves. It's a different challenge, very different to anything humanity's ever met before. And ultimately, to complete the sentence, we want affordable food for all. We have to do it making use of the available resources without destroying the planet, and we must do it using socially acceptable methods. What I mean by that is that you cannot feed an urban majority, and that's what it is now in the world, by a impoverished peasant underclass. You'll have a revolution. People will just stop doing it, or they'll go back to subsistence, and then you'll have a revolution from the urban majority. We have to stabilise the system, and that means we've got to predict that we can treat people fairly. People won't put up with poverty. With modern communication systems, people know how rich some other people are and how poor they are in comparison. We're going to have to be more equitable in the distribution of the benefits of that food system. So, although it's useful to put that slide that way in order to create the sentence, in reality, we've got to deliver all of those They are not about prioritisation. They are in separate columns, and we've got to deliver all of them. The analogy I use sometimes like the National Health Service saying, are we going to treat heart patients or cancer patients? Because we can't afford to do both complete. You don't think like that in the National Health Service. You treat everyone according to their needs. And we must do the same within our food chain. If we fail to deliver on our ethical responsibilities, we could be actually the cause of our own demise, or certainly a lot of heartache. For instance, the AI, we could trigger another bout of AI because we're not treating the animals according to their needs. And in the end, that system will break down.
Hi there. Taking your middle circle as a starting point, the environmental aspects, and I guess looking at the impacts of climate change, can I ask the panel what complications they feel the introduction and demand of biofuels are going to have on this model and all models that you are outlining over the next 50 years?
We've already seen it. I mean, we saw wheat go to the highest price the world's ever seen, and largely, I mean, some analysts said it was 75% of that rise was a direct result of the biofuel pressure. It's a bit like the meat debate. It is not about whether we should eat or not eat meat. I mean, there are other ethical arguments about whether we should or shouldn't kill animals, but parking that, assuming that that's a given for the time being within society, there are some meats that you could make a very clear case of saying we should eat. And that's the meat that's grown in areas that without those grazing livestock, we will see a massive loss of biodiversity. And it's, we tend to, I know it's an old thing, cliches are cliches for good reasons, but we chuck the baby out with the bathwater. So grass-fed on native pastoral, and this applies the world over, grass-fed meat, we should support. There are some but grain-fed meat is the issue, and I think that's really what everyone's been touching on. I mean, just it's important. I will address your biofuel thing, but if we had we run a farm at Oxford University, and down on the Thames floodplain, we kept going. We took it over to 2000, and we've kept going a project that started roughly 20 years ago where they reseeded an area of the floodplain with native grasses and wildflowers, and they've maintained 3 replicated management regimes on there and studied it. And basically it's not grazed with sheep and grazed with cattle. And to cut a long story short, the areas grazed with sheep and cattle have double the biodiversity of the ones that are not grazed. And that's true for many large areas in Wales and in our uplands on Dartmoor. We've heard about the issues of overgrazing. There have been examples of that, but we would lose massive amounts of biodiversity if we were to lose all our livestock. The same is with biofuels. There are areas where we can and arguably should grow miscanthus or other fuels, but personally I think they're part of a local fuel solution. They are not a global response to, they're not going to replace coal-powered electricity or oil. They're not part, but there isn't one solution. If we're going to live sustainably, we're going to need them all. We're going to need a bit of wave power, a bit of wind, probably in the short term a bit of nuclear. I'm not an expert on the power side. Ultimately, we're going to have to do a bit of everything. We're also working on a project on microhydro. It's quite a big opportunity for a lot of farmers in the UK because lots of farmers have got streams running through them and the technology is getting more and more efficient. But biofuels that have been oversold because, being blunt, because of vested interest, and it was incredible. I mean, a lot of people in agriculture knew what was going on. Of course, a lot of them backed it because they thought it was good for their pockets. But we all knew that I've never thought it was a good thing, encouraging these big, things that are consuming grain. Because we know, I mean, some of the analysts are suggesting that grain's going to go to £500 a tonne. That's a world none of us have got any concept of what that's like. So, no, my answer is yes, they have had a big impact. But no, they're not all, they're far from the answer.